DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We go from the prison camps at Guantanamo to an earlier era of imprisonment here in the United States. This week marks the 66th anniversary of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's signing of the executive order that forced more than 120,000 men, women, and children of Japanese descent into internment camps. This included nearly 70,000 American citizens. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld the establishment of the internment camps after civil rights pioneer Fred Korematsu was jailed for refusing to be interned. Korematsu said years later, quote, "In order for things like this to never happen, we have to protest, so don't be afraid to speak up," he said. We now turn to an interview that we played earlier last year with civil rights activist Yuri Kochiyama. Her father was detained in 1942, hours after Pearl Harbor was attacked. He died soon after. The rest of Yuri Kochiyama's family was eventually sent to an internment camp. She recalled the day federal agents detained her father.
I lived in San Pedro, California, which is, on the west side of California. And it's where many, many Japanese live. Well, the Japanese were mostly all living on the West Coast. Washington, Oregon, California, and parts of Arizona. And that's what the #1 war zone. But immediately, the newspaper headlines were, "Get the Japs out." And people like, who's the guy, the general on the West Coast, the top one? The top general, I can't think of his name. He said, "The only good Jap is a dead Jap." And anyway, not just the newspaper headlines, but there were signs all over, "Get the Japs out, get the Japs out." And
you were a teacher. You were teaching that day that Pearl Harbor was bombed?
No, I had just finished junior college. No, I wasn't teaching, but I was teaching Sunday school, and I had been teaching about a year and a half. It was a place where I felt very comfortable. But that day when I went in, I could just feel something was different. And of course, it's because that's all people were thinking about is...
Were you the only Japanese American at the Sunday school?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. It was really what you call a white church. So I took all the kids home as I usually do. They pack in the car, sit on top of each other, and I take about 10 of the kids home. And then when I came home, I just made it home. I knew my father had come back from the hospital, so I came back early, too. And just a few minutes later, 3 tall white men, I could see through the window, they were right there at the door. And so I went there to see who they were, and they all, put their, like a wallet out, which had the FBI card. And they said, "Is there a Seiichi Nakahara living here?" I said, "Yes, that's my father." I said, "Where is he right now? We need to see him." I said, "Oh, he's sleeping in bed." I said, "He just came home." I don't know if it was that morning or the day before. He came home from ulcer surgery. And they said, "Well, where is he?" And I pointed to one of the bedrooms, and they went in and got. It was done so quickly, it didn't even take half of a minute, I don't think. And I didn't dare ask a question. They were going out the door immediately. And then I just called my mother, who was right down the street, to say, "Come home quick. The FBI just came and took Pop." And
he was the first person, Japanese American, arrested after the bombing of Pearl Harbor?
That's what we heard, but I don't know if it was the first. They could have been doing all over, but I think he was one of the first, because the first 24 hours, I don't think they were, well, they did find the Japanese still very quickly. So I'm sure they had a list. And
what was his job that they went after him?
well, he was in the fishing business. And that's why it hit all fishermen, because they knew then that the fishermen knew the waters, and if the Japanese ships got close enough, would the Japanese fishermen in America help the Japanese? But actually, I tell you, the Japanese Americans and even the Issei's first generation who could not become Americans, they were so American, and yet the hysteria about the suspicion of Japanese people was very, very strong. And anyway, by the end of the day, I think all the Japanese people were calling their friends to say, did anyone come to your home and take your father or mother?
How long was your father held for?
Well, he was picked up on December 7th, and of course he wasn't getting any better because they didn't do anything for him while he was first he was in prison, and my mother kept begging, please let him go to a hospital, and then when he gets some treatment, then he could go back to the prison. But we didn't realize that when they did take him to the hospital, he was the only Japanese that was taken there, and all the other prisoners, every single one of the prisoners were Americans, all white, no black or brown or anyone else.
In the hospital?
What?
In the hospital?
Yes, in the only hospital in our town, the San Pedro Hospital. And then they put a sheet around his bed and it said, prisoner of war. And we hadn't, us kids didn't get to go see my father yet, but my mother got permission. And she said when she saw the sheet with the prisoner of war, and she saw the reaction of all the American prisoners who were just brought in from Wake Island, she didn't think he was going to last. And so she asked the head of that hospital, could he be given a room by himself and get some medication or something, and then when he was feeling better, could they take him back to the prison? Because that hospital scene, she said, was probably worse than prison, because here were all these Americans who had been injured, you know, in Wake Island or other islands, and at least in the prison, he would be probably in a cell by himself.
When ultimately did he get released? How long was he held?
He came home, he was home, not even 12 hours. He came home, it was around dinner time, 5:30, and they had a nurse come with him, and we put him in his own bedroom, and the nurse was the only one that stayed in that room. And by the next morning, she woke us up and said, he's gone.
Were you rounded up as well?
Not then. No, they were only rounding up first-generation Japanese.
So your father died.
We're American citizens.
Your father died after being released.
Yeah, well, he was only home not even 12 hours, and he was gone. So we didn't get to talk to him. We don't think he could have talked the way he looked. He jumbled or mumbled. We couldn't tell if he could see. We would put our hands in front of him. We didn't know if he could hear, and it was so fast he was gone. That
we only have a minute, but
yeah.
Were you detained, your family, after?
Every person of Japanese ancestry, 120,000 from those 3 states, 3.5 states, because it was the @1 war zone. Yeah, so 120,000. What?
And how long were you held for?
Well, everybody was, at least 2 years, I think. And then because there was this case that nobody hears of called the Endo case, where they found out in that case that actually the United States government had no right to take all the people into prison camps when there was nothing really official that could have said that we did some wrong to this country.
Yuri Kochiyama describing the Japanese internment in World War II. When we come back from break, she'll talk about the day Malcolm X was assassinated, 43 years ago this week. She cradled his head as he lay dying. Stay with us.